Number 8. Ford Pinto. The Ford Pinto sold more subcompact cars in the United States in 1974 than any other vehicle in that segment, a statistic that appears in both the company's annual report and the plaintiff's exhibit list of the litigation that followed. The oil crisis had rewritten every automotive purchasing decision the American family was making, and the Pinto was positioned at exactly the right price point at exactly the right moment. No other domestic subcompact outsold it. The majority of buyers who drove one home in 1974 drove a reliable, economical small car that started every morning and did what small cars are supposed to do. What the Pinto's annual report did not include was the internal cost-benefit analysis, later entered into evidence in the Grimshaw v. Ford case, showing that engineers had identified a fuel tank vulnerability and that the company had calculated the $11 modification cost against projected litigation costs and chosen the litigation option. Before that document became public, 400,000 Americans had already bought one in a single year. The Pinto is at number 8 because its sales record and its court record are the same decade's property, two numbers that together constitute the most complete picture of what it meant to buy a subcompact in the 1970s. Number 7. Volkswagen Beetle. In 1970, the Volkswagen Beetle had not changed its fundamental shape in 30 years. American manufacturers spent millions annually on styling updates. Volkswagen spent those years refining a design the company had decided was already correct and allowing American owners to build the case for the car through their own experience. By 1970, that case was built. The Beetle did not need advertising to explain what it was. Everyone who drove in America had seen one, knew someone who owned one, and understood what the ownership record was without being told. The decade's oil crisis reinforced an argument the Beetle had been making since the 1950s. Its air-cooled rear engine produced heat through a system that American Midwest winters found inadequate. Heater boxes that frosted or failed were a documented regional ownership experience, but the reliability case survived the heating complaint. The Beetle is at number 7 because its 1970s American presence was the accumulated weight of 2 decades of loyalty that the decade's market conditions confirmed rather than created, and because the car that had arrived as a curiosity in the 1950s ended its American run as something the market had long since accepted as part of the permanent landscape. Number 6. Toyota Corolla. By 1976, the Toyota Corolla had accumulated something that no advertising budget in American history has produced as reliably as the product itself: a word-of-mouth reputation built entirely by existing owners reporting to prospective owners what the car was actually like to live with. The Corolla's American growth through the 1970s was not driven by marketing that competed with Detroit scale. It was driven by the neighbor who had bought one in 1972, still driving it in 1977, who answered the question honestly when asked. The answer was consistent. It started, it ran, it required maintenance at the interval specified and not before, and it accumulated miles without the repair events that working-class American owners had been trained by decades of domestic ownership to expect. The oil crisis confirmed the fuel economy case the Corolla's owners had already been making. The rust at the rear wheel arches, the orange dissolution that Midwest winters produced in the thin Japanese sheet metal was the ownership experience's one acknowledged liability. The Corolla is at number 6 because its American reputation was earned incrementally and one driveway at a time, and because by the end of the decade, the argument it had been making since 1970 had already been won. Number 5. Ford Maverick. The Maverick's most effective marketing tool was its price. Ford printed $1,995 on every advertisement, every dealer sign, and every piece of showroom material because the number itself closed the argument before the presentation started. Below $2,000, domestic and available at every Ford dealer in the country, a combination that the Volkswagen Beetle could not match and that the Japanese imports had not yet established at sufficient volume to constitute a full alternative. First-year sales approached the pace of the original Mustang launch. The 1973 oil crisis extended the Maverick's commercial life rather than ending it. Buyers who had been driving full-size American cars found themselves needing a smaller option urgently, and the Maverick had 3 years of documented reliability behind it by then, something the newest subcompacts lacked. Total North American production reached approximately 2.1 million units across the Maverick's 7-year run. The Maverick is at number 5 because 2.1 million units accumulates one $1,995 transaction at a time, and because the same result in 1970 and 1974 came from 2 completely different buyer motivations. Number 4. Ford Granada. In 1976, Ford's advertising ran a direct visual comparison between the Granada and a Mercedes-Benz. The comparison had not been requested by the Mercedes-Benz marketing department. American buyers responded with 548,874 purchases that year, placing the Granada among the best-selling passenger cars in the country and confirming that the specific promise Ford had made, the appearance of European prestige at the price of an American compact, had been the correct pitch for the mid-decade American buyer. The Granada's underpinnings were the Maverick and Monarch platform. The car felt like a Maverick with better leather because beneath the formal exterior, it was. For the buyer who needed a car that looked more expensive than its sticker while coming with a Ford dealer network behind it, this was not disqualifying. The Granada is at number 4 because 500,000 Americans chose a car whose advertising made a comparison that journalists spent months carefully dismantling and bought it anyway. But while Ford was selling fake luxury to the middle class, Chevrolet was dominating the streets with a car that didn't need advertising to sell because it simply refused to die. Number 3. The Chevrolet Nova generated no memorable advertising campaigns, no cultural moments, no litigation, and no significant automotive press coverage in the 1970s. It appeared in factory parking lots, apartment complex lots, school pickup lines, and neighborhood driveways in numbers that made it statistically certain that any American who drove in the decade worked alongside someone who owned one, and it did this by being reliably and consistently the compact Chevrolet that the working American buyer chose when they needed a car and needed it to start every day. Its front subframe unibody construction, the inline-6 and small block V8 options, and the mechanical accessibility that the decade's independent mechanics could service without difficulty gave it the durability record that its buyers needed and its reputation confirmed. Annual production ran between 250,000 and 350,000 units through most of the decade. The Nova is at number 3 because its achievement was the absence of a story. The car that showed up in the morning, accumulated the miles, and asked for nothing beyond the basic maintenance that its owners could afford on the schedule their budgets permitted. Number 2. Oldsmobile Cutlass. Nobody expected the Oldsmobile Cutlass to lead American car sales in 1975 and 1976. The analysts expected the Chevrolet, the manufacturers expected the Chevrolet. The buyers who chose the Cutlass in sufficient volume to put it at the top of the national sales chart, not just the mid-size chart, the entire national chart, did so for reasons that had nothing to do with what the market analysts had anticipated. Total Cutlass production across the decade reached 4.2 million units, assembled across coupe, sedan, and station wagon configurations that covered every buyer in the market segment. The Cutlass occupied the position the decade's middle class required, above the Nova in perceived quality, below the Buick in price, available in a coupe that communicated the aspiration the decade's buyers understood. The Cutlass is at number 2 because 4.2 million units across a decade is the portrait of an entire social stratum making the same decision, and because 2 years at the top of American sales during the worst economic years of the decade is a record that required the market to vote. Number 1. Chevrolet Impala and Caprice. The 1970s were the decade in which the oil crisis, the federal emissions requirements, and the sustained economic recession were supposed to end the full-size American car permanently.
The Chevrolet Impala and Caprice spent 6 of the decade's 10 years leading American car sales and confirming that the prediction was wrong. In 1971, 1972, 1973, 1977, 1978, and 1979, more Americans chose a full-size Chevrolet than any other car on the market. Not merely more than any other full-size, but more than any other car from any segment. The Caprice's premium interior and the Impala's accessible pricing gave the full-size Chevrolet an argument at every price point in the segment. The 1975 catalytic converters produced a sulfur exhaust note on cold starts that made every parking lot in America smell like rotten eggs every morning, a side effect that owners accepted as the price of compliance. The Impala and Caprice are at number 1 because 6 of 10 years at the top is the fullest possible answer to the question of what the 1970s American driver chose when choosing a car. Through an oil crisis, through stagflation, through every argument the decade produced for choosing something smaller, the answer in 6 of those 10 years was this.